Architecture is a slow business. It's quite common now for architecture and landscape to be discussed in the same breath. You know, those silos. I think a lot of those have melted quite a lot. I think you have to be optimistic for one simple reason, because everything that architects do is about the future. You know, even if you're restoring a castle, it's not really about the past, is it? It's about people visiting that castle in the future. They come to World Architecture Festival in order to remind themselves why they fell in love with architecture in the first place. Yeah. Everybody says it's great, and you think, I'm bound to be disappointed. It has very thin facades, so the energy loss is quite substantial. But they are so beautiful. You were talking about quite an interesting profession. I mean, it's not like surgeons who basically, for good or ill, they'll complete everything they start. I think for really good projects, there's sort of moments in the architect's mind when something crystallizes. It's the sort of magic, the magic moment when everything becomes resolved. Or let's say you reach a point where you know everything can be resolved. It was a revelation, really. It was so good.
Welcome to Out of Context, which is an exhibition here at WAF Miami 2025.
Delighted to be here.
Yes, thank you for coming. And thank you for your invitation, generous invitation to come here. And so we have 7 different architects from 7 different countries. There's some very different projects, and the idea is to trace the origins of the ideas that inspire these architects. And this morning we had several roundtable discussions about their works. And now I'm meeting with other architects, delegates, and critics, and architects working around the world.
Yeah.
And I want to know more about the situation we have right now in the profession, what inspires everyone, what kind of architecture they think is good. So to start, I want to ask you to introduce yourself and what is your role in this festival?
My name is Paul Finch. I'm the program director of the World Architecture Festival, and I launched it in 2008, so we're in our 18th year. I spent most of my professional life as a journalist, and I edited 3 architectural magazines in the UK, Building Design, the Architect's Journal, and the Architectural Review. And it was when I was editing the Architectural Review that the idea of a global festival for architects first happened, because the AR is an international magazine, and we were very easily able to ask our readers and subscribers whether they'd be interested in such a thing. We got positive answers, so we ended up launching it. Apart from that, my other aspects of what I do a bit of design review. I chair 1 or 2 design-related charity trusts, but my main focus is World Architecture Festival.
And where did this idea come from? Does this mean that you were not satisfied with the existing forums of architecture? What did you want to bring into a new festival? How did you want to make it different? And what makes WAF different and unique?
I think really it was because we would go to festivals where you would see architects, but they were usually actually real estate related. So MIPIM in the south of France, the sort of European and sort of global event. And then Cityscape was launched in the Middle East out of Dubai, and that grew very rapidly. It was bigger than MIPIM all of a sudden. And we actually cooperated with Cityscape. This was the Architectural Review. And we used to run some awards with them and little conference sessions. But the question for us was that those events, the architects were always the bit part players. You know, they'd be hoping they might get some work if they met the right people. And our question was, well, why isn't there a global event where architects are the stars of the show? And of course, there are some, for example, Venice Biennale. However, and the UIA, but they're not annual, and there's a certain element of either curation or selection as to who can attend or why they're attending. So the question for us was, well, is there an international annual event to showcase the work of architects? And the only ones we could find were where they were about a particular subject. So it might be waterfront architecture, or it might be concrete architecture. But what we were interested in was an event where you could almost get a snapshot of what is the profession designing currently, or what's it just finished, and how can people compare and contrast what they're doing with their contemporaries. And the key moment really was, we knew it couldn't just be a conference, because global conferences are really difficult to organise, and in any event there are so many national conferences. So we thought, well, it has to be an awards programme, but it can't be the usual model of an awards programme where people send in their designs and then a jury goes off and meets in secret and decides who the winners are. So we kind of synthesized our desire for something that was annual and open to everybody, with, of course, the idea the whole thing should be live. In other words, it had to be a live, face-to-face event, not online and not in secret, everything open. So the model that we came up with was the model that we still use today, which we would have a call for entries. Anybody could enter anything. They didn't have to be selected, and they pay a fee to enter. Same for everybody. And we would shortlist and then get the better designs and their architects to be presented at a live event, which is what happens today. And the best way of it sounds complicated, but the best way of describing that awards program is it's rather like a dog show. So we have a 3-day event. For the first 2 days, we have 18 presentation rooms, and in those rooms you will see people presenting. Let's say in one room it'll just be house. In another word, it's school. In another word, it'll be transport. And at the end of each day, we will have a best of breed winner. And then on the final day, we wanted to give the 3-day event a certain drama and a choreography. So on the final day, all those best of breed winners, the category winners, have to present again to super juries, slightly more famous names. And they present in 4 sections. So it's completed buildings, future projects, interiors, and landscape. And the super juries then decide the best in show awards. So there are just 4 of them. We have some other special prizes for things like use of colour or use of natural light. But the actual competitive awards programme ends up with 4 best in show, which get presented at the gala dinner, which is the conclusion of the 3-day festival. And that model is essentially the same as when we launched in Barcelona in 2008. And since then, we've been in Barcelona, then we moved to Singapore, then we moved back to Europe, to Berlin, Amsterdam, Lisbon, then back to Singapore, and now this year for the first time in the USA. A long ambition to come to America, of course.
This year and next year.
This year and next year.
So this is amazing. I understand that you've been going through so many projects, hundreds of projects every year.
Yeah.
So you are very much aware of where architecture is, probably more than anyone. How would you assess the current situation in the discourse and profession? Are we in crisis, or are we not in crisis? What do you think about the current state of architecture?
Well, the thing is, when you're selecting, great buildings for people to come and present, you probably you do get a very biased picture about what the state of architecture is, because it all looks pretty good. And of course, if people are entering the awards, it implies that they've got work, or and they can afford to come to the festival. So there's an element of probably slightly too optimistic compared with the general state of practices and economies. But then the festival, in a way, is for architects to be able to forget about all those day-to-day problems. And I like to use the phrase that they come to World Architecture Festival in order to remind themselves why they fell in love with architecture in the first place.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's important. I think so if we're just talking about about design and architectural trends, I would say that over the years, I think things have improved in the sense that there were things which used to be rather special subjects like sustainability or, communities and colonial legacies never got talked about. Now all these matters are openly discussed and quite often inform the basis for a lot of the architecture that we see. So I think architecture from that point of view has become more conscious about its place in the world. As to overall design quality, I find that almost impossible to assess. For one thing, there are obviously good buildings that people have not entered for our awards, and we judge what is entered. So if one were making a true global comparison, we would have to look at a lot of other things. But I think the standard of design, is pretty high, and the question is, in any given year, is whether the winners are really completely outstanding or just really good. And that's very difficult to predict. I think there are some other trends one can see. I mean, one is, I think it's quite common now for architecture and landscape to be discussed in the same breath. Those silos, I think a lot of those have melted quite a lot. And you now find a lot of projects where there's a sort of seamless interplay between outside and inside, man-made and natural. And in a way, our conference theme this year, because we always have a thematic conference, it's called Hearts and Minds, and in a way I think that reflects this question about about the combination of the rational side of architecture, calculation, science, structure, prediction, and the softer elements, emotion, sensation, look and feel, impact. So, speakers talking about the effect that the built environment has on the human brain and what the human brain does when it's confronted by the built environment or when it wants to improve it. So I think these are interesting things.
It seems like architecture is getting fine-tuned, right? And there is a more control of what can be achieved, right?
I think that started with feelings about sustainability, very powerful in the general public. In architecture, so hearts, people are worried about the future and their children, their grandchildren. It's actually translated then into the minds of architects and engineers, particularly environmental engineers. How are we going to deal with this? And that, of course, will be a matter of calculation and rational policy making rather than heart on sleeve, because it has to be. So I think that the requirement to start meeting stricter regulatory controls on carbon emission means that there has been much more calculation, I would say, about buildings. And a good example of that would be, people used to talk about the cost in use of buildings or the energy cost in use and ignore the carbon and the energy that went into making the materials in the new buildings in the first place. Now that's completely ended. So I think there's a much more sophisticated attitude to whole life cost. And I suppose the thing now, I think that has brought more attention onto the subject, and because it's brought more attention, it becomes a more critical area. So, for example, people now ask, or they now say, well, it's all very well saying that you've calculated this carbon thing, but have you tested it when the building's completed? You know, did you do post-occupational analysis? Have you looked at all the energy bills? Were the claims being made by all the people to get regulatory approval turned out to be rubbish? And I think we'll see more of that sort of analysis, sort of whole life analysis. That seems to be the way things are trending. And the other thing at the moment, of course, which is both, I think, you know, it's an opportunity, but is also worries people probably more than they would admit, is AI. I mean, on the one hand, you say, well, you know, computer graphics and all the rest of it have done the profession nothing but good. On the other hand, if so much initial work can be done on an AI basis at a crude level, a business level, it means will all practices start shrinking because they'll be able to do so much more efficiently with fewer people, and obviously that's quite alarming. And I think that the only thing you would say, well, even if that's true, does it mean the end of the profession? I don't think it does at all. I think it's just that maybe the softer values in architecture, the you know, empathy, consultation, understanding, may become more important. We'll see. That's going to be a long-term question, which will be discussed. If I could give an example of what happens. So one of the things at the festival is the Architecture Drawing Prize. This year we changed the rules, and instead of silo categories, hand-drawn, digital, hybrid, we abandoned all that, because with people using AI, we could have said, okay, we've got to have a hybrid, we've got to have an AI silo. And when you thought, but supposing they're using AI, you know, in digital, could be using it a lot, in hybrids also a lot, hand drawings, well, they shouldn't be, but supposing that's their working model, they do use some AI, even if it's mainly hand drawing. So we decided that the best thing to do was to completely scrap the silos. So now people just enter their drawing.
Any drawing.
Any drawing, any medium, and all they do is they just tell us how the drawing has been created.
Oh, okay. And they are also presenting, right? They present the drawing, so
they
this
didn't.
is
No,
just
they
judged
don't.
by the end result.
That's a jury meets in London, and there are 15 winners this year, and
Oh, wow.
the 15. I mean, we used to have 3 winners, and then an overall winner. So we had silo winners and then an overall. This year we've got the 15 are all winners, and they're all going to be exhibited at the Soane Museum in London.
Oh, wow.
We always have an exhibition, but before it was an exhibition of like 3 or 4 winners and then another dozen projects. But what we're saying now is actually the ones we're selecting for exhibition are all winners. And then we as a memory of the origins of the prize, we are having a special prize for a pure hand drawing. But it's no one enters a silo. If we see a hand drawing we think is great, we can give it a special prize.
Let me ask you a very different question. I want to know what kind of architecture brings you joy?
Yes, an interesting question, because joy is not the same as beauty, is it? I think there are... Well, let's put it this way. I don't know if joy is quite the right word, but there are buildings that I feel very happy to go into on a repeating basis. It doesn't matter how many times I go into, I still like going into them. So a historic example would be the Reform Club in London. by Charles Barry. It's a wonderful atmosphere. You know, it's modelled on Renaissance Palazzo, but it's a 19th century kind of London
And this was built
club.
in.
Well, the Reform Club was based on people who supported parliamentary, radical parliamentary change in the 19th century. And the Reform Act, the Great Reform Act, was passed in 1832,
Okay.
which extended the franchise for people to vote. Didn't extend it to women, but it extended it to a lot more men. So I mean, it's just
almost a 200-year-old building, and
Yeah,
you picked
it's
that
a very,
as
it's a very
one of the
comfortable
most joyous
environment.
experience for you.
I think joy is pushing it too far. I feel very comfortable and happy to be there. Let me think of some completely different examples. Well, I suppose the building that I thought this is extraordinary, but again, I don't think it was exactly joy. It was admiration. Was a building about which there'd been so much publicity. I think two examples actually, where everybody says it's great, and you think I'm bound to be disappointed because everybody says it's so brilliant, and you think if it's anything less than absolutely brilliant, I'm going to be disappointed. But in two cases, I was not disappointed. I was just extraordinary pieces of, architecture. So one is the Farnsworth House by Mies van der Rohe, and the other is Ronchon, Corbusier's chapel, which is really quite a profound experience. I wouldn't quite.
When did you visit it?
Ronchon I visited it about, what would it be, maybe 8 or 9 years ago.
For the first time?
Yeah, and it was quite extraordinary.
I still have to make that journey.
Well, I think it more than lives up to expectations. I mean, it is a sort of.
Now there is an addition
I think
by
the word will be.
Renzo Piano?
I think it's awe-inspiring. No, not to the chapel itself. There are some associated buildings for there was a
kind of
convent and
hidden.
things, which are adjacent, sort of on the route up to the chapel. But no, the chapel is pretty much as it was. Beautiful coloured glass. Fantastic atmosphere.
Maybe you can share maybe one or two more experiences of visiting buildings that are so memorable you could never forget. Very striking, memorable experiences.
An amazing one is at Yale University, the Beinecker Library, which I think is rather energy wasteful building. I mean, so it's not fashionable in sort of in energy terms, because it has very thin facades, so the energy loss is quite substantial. But they are so beautiful, and as somebody said, well, on the campus, one of the buildings has got to be the least efficient. But it is an extraordinary space to be in. And it's a very, very thin, almost translucent stone clads the building, so you just get this rather remarkable feeling. I suppose, again, I mean, a historic example will be Castelvecchio in Verona by Carlo Scarpa, which again was a revelation, really. It was so good. I don't know, I always enjoy going to the Venice Biennale, and the Cordieri is always a pleasure. I think it's called is it the Blue Mosque? There's a mosque in Istanbul, which it's a smaller one, but it's right next to the Spice Market. Mm-hmm. Again, fabulous experience. And I think the historic buildings in Istanbul are quite remarkable. And then kind of newer buildings. Well, most of my knowledge of that, I would say, is more in the UK because of various awards judging things I've been on. And you see lots of good new buildings every year. to tell the truth. A great building by an architect working outside his own country, Raphael Vignoli's Tokyo Forum building in Tokyo. Magnificent convention center, really completely wonderful. Probably his best building.
And you know, there are absolutely wonderful story about how the idea popped up in his head, you know, for that particular project. He participated in the competition, which, by the way, was the first international competition in Japan's history. It was never done as an international competition before. He participated. He was really frustrated. So I think it was maybe 89, maybe 90. He decided to stop work. He took a break. He went on a plane to Paris for, you know, small vacation.
Yeah.
He took Pan Am flight. He was on the plane. The dinner was being served, and all of a sudden he is given the napkins with the logo of Pan Am airline.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And he looks at that logo, and he sees Tokyo Forum.
Wow.
He takes that you know, section of that globe logo, and he starts recomposing his
what a great
proposal.
story.
He lands, he calls everybody in New York, we are going back to work. He canceled his vacation, he went back straight to New York, everybody renewed
Amazing.
working. He won the competition, and the jury was absolutely convinced he was Japanese because it's so Japanese looking, and people like Norman Foster and others participated in the exhibition, but he was the one who won. And this is such an irrational story that really proves that architecture is art. Architecture can be rational, but it can be very irrational.
Yeah,
and there
I think
are a million ways of doing architecture.
Yes, I think there's this balance between which we've tried to reflect in our conference theme this year. Because there are lots of ways of expressing hearts and minds, but you could say instinct and reason, you know, intuition, analysis, and so on. And, you know, I think for really good projects, there's sort of moments in the architect's mind when something crystallizes. It's the sort of magic, the magic moment when everything becomes resolved. Or let's say, you reach a point where you know everything can be resolved because you've got the party, if one wants to use that word. Well, the diagram is the word I like. The diagram, you understand what is going on here.
Finally, I want to ask you, what advice would you give to a young architect?
This is not really my advice, but I heard someone else give the advice, and I thought, well, I'll remember that because it's so useful. I think it's to understand the virtues of patience. I mean, architecture, as the great architect Cedric Price used to remark, architecture is a slow business. If you want to get things done in a hurry, you're in the wrong trade. And you've also got to understand that actually a lot of the work that architects do, you could describe as wasted. I mean, for example, Rainier de Graaf, the partner at OMA, once did an exhibition in Rome called On Hold, and it was all about projects that didn't go anywhere. And he went through every job number that OMA had ever had, and about 80% of them had not resulted in a building or anything else. However, the work and thinking that went into the 80% quite obviously would have had an effect on the 20% that they did win. Now, if you think that really good architects might only actually get to win the pitch and get to build the thing that they've designed, you're talking about quite an interesting profession. I mean, it's not like surgeons who basically for good or ill, they'll complete everything they start. I mean, there's no question about that. So I think being patient and understanding that the use of your time and your intellect, it's not wasted. It must inform. It's the research for the things that you do finish and win. So I think patience is and you might add in the word resilience.
Yeah.
I think you have to be optimistic for one simple reason, because everything that architects do is about the future. You know, even if you're restoring a castle, it's not really about the past, is it? It's about people visiting that castle in the future by definition. So I think that's why architecture fundamentally is an optimistic activity, because even if you think you're trying to cope with a terrible situation, floods, hurricanes, emergency housing, nevertheless, the implication is that you think that you can make things better.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for a beautiful conversation. Thank
Delighted.
you for sharing your ideas. So please, if you can sign
Yeah,
twice.
Anywhere you
So
like.
one is for you, one is for me, but anywhere you can find a place for your signature, and I will sign a book for you.
I should
as
do
well.
it down here, shouldn't I, really?
But don't be too modest. No, you should. I mean, this will tell about your character as well. You know, how you find a place and what will be the size of, of your signature.
Okay.